Welcome to Short Course, episode 135 for September 13th, 2024. I'm your host, Ben Barry. I am happy to report that the 2024 North Carolina section match is complete and has gone well. I'll be talking about that some more in a few upcoming episodes. I have some thoughts in the vein of this episode, but in the reviewing some of the things that were in common in how both Area 6 and the North Carolina section were run. Since Stephanie, my wife, was running North Carolina and I was running Area 6, although, we both had involvement at various levels in both, but our mindset in how to run each match was overall fairly similar. So it was an interesting opportunity to experiment with some ideas in two matches in the same year. So, like I said, I'll talk more about that as sort of a combo topic, Area 6 and North Carolina section, but there were a few things about Area 6 that I did want to wrap up on before we move on too far. But I happy to say the match went well. My gun, the repair appears to be holding. Everything is working now. The trigger's as good as ever, nice and crisp, and no real arguments. The gun ran well, the gear ran well, and I shot, I think, fairly well. Certainly a few mistakes, a few hiccups. I was not typically with a name like Ben Barry, whether we sort by first name or last name, I'm very often the first person on the first stage. So I'm pretty used to that. In this case, I was actually second on the first stage, which meant I was first on the second stage. And of course, and this is a trap that I should know better, but it was a 32 round field course, and it was a big stage with lots of targets, and I was the first one up, so I didn't get to see anyone else shoot it. And sure enough, I shot 30 of the 32 required rounds. If I'd watched the guy in front of me shoot it, or watched the whole squad potentially, I probably would have realized that there was a target, as typically happens, that I'd seen early on in my walkthroughs, and as I was working out other parts of the stage, and then I came back to the end, I kind of forgot he was there, and I never did the final double check at the end that, my final stage plan is actually still 32 rounds. So I took 2 mics and FTSA on that one. Again, in my mind, I should know that, okay, any stage where I'm up first, especially, I should be very cognizant of not missing a target. And it's just one of those things. It's in a weird way, I've gone, it was a long time that I was shooting before I got my first FTSA, but I feel like I've had a bit of a spate of them in the last year or two. Often just talking to folks, not doing enough visualization. Obviously, when I am on the range, people want to come up and talk to me, which I don't mind at all. It's nice to actually get a chance to kind of get a lot of different viewpoints and opinions all in one place. But it's on me. And in this case, it was the opposite. This was the squad that I ended up shooting on Sunday was very chill, very laid back, but I just was too far in my head and not looking at the stage. So I ended up in a little bit of a change from last year. So in years past, we've done chrono on staff day by trying to have all the staff come through chrono before they start shooting. And that was not really a hugely successful way of doing things, mostly just because you're really assembly lining people through. And if there's any backups, then potentially you're holding up the whole staff match while you have to fix whatever the issues are. And in this case, we just went to having, the plan was originally, it was myself, was just going to be running chrono for the staff solo. So running both the bullet pulling station, weighing the bullet, going through all the gear checks with the gun, and then chronoing the ammo, but doing it back to back with stage 1 in the match. But, thinking, okay, the staff is going to be self-resetting. It'll probably balance out with me, running a one-man chrono. As it happened, the guy that I was going to be working with on chrono, he ended up having his gun go down during the match, and so he didn't finish shooting the staff match, and so he and I actually ended up working chrono for the staff all day Friday, all day Saturday, sort of trained him up and some new guys to run it, and then Sunday he ran it with some more staff, and I was able to just go and shoot the match on Sunday. So interesting kind of inverse of, having all the staff shoot on Friday. And yeah, it worked well. So I got to just kind of pretend like I was a regular competitor after doing chrono for a couple of days, and we'll talk some more about that next week, I think. But happy to say the match went well. I'm as happy with my shooting as I can be. I'd actually like to spend some more time with this gun, hopefully have a little more time to dry fire in this off season. And depending on where things end up next year, actually try and actually shoot pretty well at some majors, which was pretty much off the table for this whole year. But who knows? We'll see what the future brings. But like I mentioned, I wanted to just kind of cover some of the decisions when we were laying out the structure of Area 6 and next week North Carolina section as well, and evaluate basically whether I think they worked or not. So, for example, at Area 6, one of the decisions that we made was to run a side match. And the idea of this was that we were going to be taking one of the largest bay in terms of sort of general square area. There were some bays that were longer and skinnier, but the largest kind of big square open space bay. We were taking that bay and using it for the vendor area as well as a test fire area. And the thought was, okay, it's wide enough. Off to one side, let's put a side match and give people something to do either when they're not shooting, or if they flew into the match and have some leftover ammo, or they just want to go shoot. And this is one of those things where it's not something that I've seen. I'm trying to think if I've ever been to, certainly not a US Nationals that I can think of, or really, yeah, I can't think of a match off the top of my head that I went to that had a side match, but I'm aware that this is something that was done historically. And I think if we can bring back more of the sort of festival atmosphere of matches where you're not just going to the match to shoot. Yes, you're going to be there at your appointed time to shoot, but in your downtime, in your off time, there are other things to do. There's the vendors to visit, there are side matches to shoot, that sort of thing. I thought it would be an interesting experiment to try and do that. Now, in this particular case, I don't think it was a success, largely because of the schedule of the match. So, as I mentioned last week, the staff shot all day Thursday, so 12 stages in a day. Friday was main match competitors, but still, start in the morning, shoot 12 stages in a day, done in the evening around dinner time. Saturday was similar timing, although half of the squads that started Saturday morning shot a half day, and then you had the half day Saturday PM squads that started. So there wasn't really a ton of downtime, in the sense that even if you were shooting a half day Saturday schedule, you were likely using the other half of the day to walk stages. So, and then everybody who shot a half day on Saturday finished up with a half day on Sunday, and that was the end of the match. So I think in retrospect, a side match would probably fit better at a match where it was more like Nationals, where you're shooting multiple half days. So if there was an Area 6 where basically Friday and Saturday were the main match, and everybody shot a half day Friday and a half day Saturday, and then basically that leaves you 2 half days that you're around where you can walk stages and whatnot, but you have a little more time available on the range to do something like shoot a side match, visit the vendors. I think it probably would have been a better success there. And again, it was just kind of a, why don't people do this? Let's just try it. Let's see what happens. The format of the match actually followed the sort of action steel kind of pattern of having static steel challenge style plates that you shoot, but the small plates get 1 shot, the big plates get 2. And in this case, it was an 8-foot wide shooting area, and there was basically a small 10-inch plate you could see from one end of the shooting area, small 10-inch plate you could see from the other end of the shooting area, and then off to your left there was a big 2-foot by 3-foot cookie sheet, big steel challenge plate. In the middle there was one of those, and then all the way to the right there was one of those. And so the idea was basically you have to go to either side to shoot the small plate, and then you have to get the big plates somewhere in the middle on the move across, and then you have to finish by shooting the other small plate. And I think the format was good. It basically let you do multiple runs without having to go down and paste. And this was on a common firing line with the test fire line. So the idea being, again, you could have multiple people doing runs. You could paint the targets between as needed, but it wasn't required to reset between, which is part of the goal, why we didn't want to use paper targets. We also had the start position be low ready, with the idea being potentially people might want to shoot the side match with either demo guns, if there were a sponsor there who had brought guns, which Taurus was there. They had their guns, but we didn't end up having any sponsors, and we'll talk about this more next week, but we didn't have any sponsors agree to our sponsorship terms that were gun manufacturers. We had an ammo manufacturer, so there was ammo there to be shot, but there weren't that many demo guns. And at the end of the day, I don't know that people really were that interested in shooting with a demo gun, all things considered. Now, the cost structure was $2 for a single run or 3 runs for $5. And I think almost everybody just did the increments of $5, which made making change easy. And it was fun in the sense that you kind of, in the same way that a Steel Challenge stage, you get a couple runs at it and you can kind of warm up and then peak and then have kind of a cool down run or whatever. Having a couple runs, most people went for that plan. And that was kind of, that was the goal, is if someone really just wants to shoot it once, they can do that. But really the goal was to kind of get people putting some rounds on it, just, I don't know, to have fun, to try something different. But again, I think it was more of a timing thing. It was all the way at one end of the range. And as mentioned, one of the drawbacks of Belton is just how spread out everything is. If it had been more central and it was close to the parking lot where everybody was parked, I think more people kind of on their way back to their car might have stopped and done it. So definitely something there. In its current incarnation, it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a success either. It just kind of was. But I don't think it is definitely not something that I would not run it exactly the way it was again in the same bay, in the same range and everything. I would want to tweak the formula somehow before doing it again, whether that's, like I said, scheduling or something else. But again, it was an interesting idea, that the whole low ready thing. If someone wanted to borrow a gun, they could, but we just didn't see that much of it. That said, I don't have any qualms about what we did with taking that big bay and using it for the vendor area, having lots of space for vendors to set up, and having a test fire bay. I think especially for an area match where it is pretty expected that people will be flying in with guns, having somewhere that, especially in the age of red dots, that people can check their zero, or just run a few rounds. If they're picking up ammo, maybe they want to, if they're actually doing more traditional match ammo, have the, buy the ammo, have it picked up at the match, not the certified ammo stuff that we'll talk about later. If they're actually doing that, wanting to check their zero with that ammo, check that it functions, I think for level 3, a test fire function fire bay really is, I think, a pretty much a necessity. We didn't, just because of the way the schedule was set up, because we were doing the split AM PM type scheduling, we didn't really have the option to schedule in a stop at the vendor bay on the schedule, which again, if we'd done that, I'm sure we probably would have gotten a lot more takers at the side match. But there wasn't a way to really make it work with the size of the squads that we had already opened up for, expecting to have 12 stops, trying to add a 13th stop. Just there wasn't really a way to do it with the lunch schedule. So that would be something else, is working out the scheduling, maybe add a 13th stage and then have the 14th stop be the vendor area, and then have the squads be one shooter smaller just to balance it out. You could do something there, but yeah, just in terms of having a demo bay, I think, again, the sponsorship is something we'll talk about later, but if there were more gun sponsors there and they wanted you to be able to put some rounds to their guns, I think in terms of actually being able to sell and market to shooters, having that kind of try before you buy experience is something that is hard to get anywhere else. And so I do think matches, and especially level 3 and nationals matches, provide that kind of opportunity when they can, and sponsors should take advantage of it when they can. One of the other decisions that we did make was with the structure of just shuttling people all the way from one end of the range to the other. So there was some discussion, if you look at the map of Belton, you could reasonably break up the stages, even as we had them laid out, into a zone 1, which would be stage 1 through 6, and a zone 2, which would be 7 through 12. There are kind of two reasons why we didn't want to do that. One is the bay size in this hypothetical zone 1. The bays in those stages were quite a bit bigger, and in particular, the bays that we used for 10, 11, and 12 were quite a bit smaller. And so the way that we used that in the plan, not zoning the stages into multiple zones, was by having 3 12-round short courses as stages 10, 11, and 12. And this being a staff reset match, you don't even necessarily have to hang out after your squad has shot. And so potentially you could have some people flowing through 10, 11, 12, and then as soon as you're done shooting 12, if 4 or 5 of you are done, hop on a shuttle and go ahead and go down to 1. Now, 1 was right next to the vendor area, so if there was a backup at 1, then the shooters could spend time in the vendor area. As it was, there wasn't a backup at 1. Stage 1 was run as a pretty tight ship, and so they weren't really causing any issues that I was aware of during the match. So everything basically flowed in that way. And that was sort of the idea. That was why we went against the zones, is that basically it would be very hard to balance bigger, longer stages 1 through 6 with the shorter, faster 10 through 12. And by having everything run in one kind of linear sequence where you have these 3 fast stages back to back and then this long trip all the way from 12 to 1, even on a shuttle, it sort of made it so that everybody went through that one at a time. Additionally, the downside to the zones would be if we were doing that zone approach, then even on Friday, the all-day squads basically would have had a big lunch break flip-flop where everybody would have to go from one zone to the other. So you'd have to move 6 times 12, 72 people from, zone 1 to zone 2 and vice versa. And you basically would end up needing a whole bunch of golf carts to do that. And if you're going to have those golf carts, it costs the same to rent them all day. You're paying to rent them all day, so you might as well use them all day. And so just having the shuttles running continuously meant that people could get back to their cars if they needed to, get around the range, rather than trying to do kind of one big flip-flop operation where everybody was trying to go from zone 1 to zone 2 over a lunch break. And potentially if one zone got backed up, but the other was ahead, then people might, they're in that particular case, I don't think it ended up making sense. Now, again, going back to the idea of a multi-day match where, again, this hypothetical 2-day Area 6 match where everybody shoots a half day Friday, everybody shoots a half day Saturday. In that case, I think zones do make more sense. But anytime that you're trying to have people flip-flop from one zone to another in the same day, I think it's not an approach that was appealing to us. And I wouldn't change that. I think the way that we did it with having all the stages back to back, having the short stages flow into the long shuttle ride into the vendor area into stage 1, I think that worked out. I have no regrets about how we structured that. One thing that was not really a choice, but sort of a calculated risk, was the fact that we did choose to pick a date late in August for the match. And this was largely driven by the fact that Belton Gun Club is basically on one of the 2 towns near it. So it's close to the town of Belton, but the other town that it's close to, sort of on the northern side, is Anderson, which is basically the biggest town outside of Clemson to Clemson. So a lot of people go there and stay there and are in town for Clemson home football games. And so if we tried to hold a match on the same weekend as a Clemson home football game, hotels would be $300-$400 a night if you could get one. And wouldn't you know it, basically looking at the Handgun Nationals date in September, which is, I believe, this weekend, and the Open PCC Nationals weekend in October, there were a few weekends in September that we were looking at where we could make that work. And as it was, Clemson ended up booking a home football game on both of them. And so that basically pushed us into either going into deeper into October or going earlier into August. And I think we got lucky. Things certainly could have been a lot worse in terms of the weather. Most days we topped out at a high of about 90 degrees, and we didn't have any hurricanes, we didn't have any torrential rain, and so the weather was not it was not amazing, but it was definitely, it could have been a lot worse. It was unseasonably cool by about 10 degrees. So that was definitely fortunate, but that was a real risk that we took for sure. And I don't know that there's really any lesson learned there from the area match side, but this is a point that I am kind of banging the drum on within the board as we're looking at the Nationals plan for next year, is having 3 Nationals, especially the way so it messes up the schedule in all kinds of ways, right? So when you have a Carry Optics Nationals in June, well, then there are a bunch of matches that are trying to get scheduled before that because they don't want to be after Nationals for their people, because for a lot of people, Nationals is the culmination of their season. But then you have this other issue where if Carry Optics is your main division, then you've already shot the biggest match of the year in June. So, when you have 3 Nationals, you basically either have to spread them out like that and have one early one in the middle of summer, or, like we did here, you have basically 2 back-to-back, one in September, one in October. And the more Nationals you have, the more you drop sort of a cannonball into the schedule, because nobody can really schedule the week before or really even the week after a Nationals. For a lot of folks, it's pretty tough. And so I think definitely trying to be sensitive to that in terms of the scheduling of Nationals. I think ideally Nationals would be the last match of the year for most folks. And that means going into October. In some cases, if you can have it somewhere where the weather is fortunate, even November. I know there are some folks where, you start getting into November and they've got snow on the ground where they're at, but at least they've had sort of the summer to train. Whereas if you start doing things like what was done with whatever they called the 2021 Production Nationals Classic, Factory Gun, whatever it was, Iron Sights Nationals, I don't remember, but that was the last Nationals I shot because they put Production Nationals in April, and I just thought, yeah, this is a joke. This is what you do with second class divisions that don't get a real Nationals. You put it in the spring because then you don't really get a season to train up for it. So I think we made the best of a bad situation, kind of being hemmed in by 2 Nationals in the fall, and then also the Clemson situation. Could be, this year, if it's back at Belton, that we get lucky and a nice weekend in the middle of September is wide open and the weather's perfect. But there are just all these external factors that are outside of your control as a match director. And I think to some degree, the message I'm trying to convey to the board is, yes, people will reschedule their matches around us, but let's not make them if we don't have to. Let's try and make it so that if people want to have their section matches later in the year, if people want to have their area matches later in the year, they can do that, and they're not stepping over each other, scheduling them, on top of Nationals. So definitely, like I said, a decision that we made that we, I think, got away with. I don't know that we really had many other good options, but in this case, I wouldn't go back and change anything, knowing how the weather did end up turning out and everything. And one thing that I realized I left off the kind of lessons learned or went well sections on the previous episodes. One thing that we did differently at this match that I think did work well, and I would definitely recommend it. This is hardly new to us, but if it's the first you're hearing of it, it's definitely the way to go, is in terms of painting hardcover. If you can buy 2-inch, 3-inch wide masking tape, black masking tape. It comes in big rolls from Amazon. And if you tape the actual, scoring edge where the hardcover meets the brown, you tape that consistently on every target, and you have sort of one person doing the taping, and then you have another person with just a 3-inch or a 6-inch roller with just a tray of paint doing the painting. It makes the actual painting process really simple, and I think a lot easier than dealing with spray paint, especially when you're dealing with hundreds of hardcover targets. Obviously, you can go the route of getting the pre-painted ones. I know with IPSC, the only vendor that I'm aware of that has pre-painted ones is CHL. And from what I've heard, they are somewhat inconsistent. I don't have firsthand experience on that, but what it may be in that case, and what I've been told is, well, yeah, they just kind of paint the rough areas, and then you still have to go in and apply the edges with tape, which, maybe there's something there. Maybe I'm proposing that you do your own hardcover with tape and then paint. If you buy those targets and you just have to apply the tape, well then, you can do that. You could even do that sitting on your couch watching TV or something if you just, want to grab a box and knock them out before the match. Now, we were in a weird situation where the targets were all shipped to the range and we lived 5 hours away. And so we had to kind of do everything when we got to the range. And so on our first day of build day, we had a crew of 3 people, just spent most of the day painting all 300, I think it was 330 total hardcover targets. But the goal there was to have plenty for changes. So anytime a perf got a little bit faint, just swap out a new one. It's an area match. Let's not cut corners on that. But, we basically had to do that as a part of our setup day because it wasn't something where we had a on-site crew that could do it. Other matches like, North Carolina, they were able to deal with that ahead of time and have that done weeks ago. But again, due to the particular structure of this match, we weren't. And the last point that I'll talk about here to kind of wrap up the Area 6 specific topics that I've got and wrap up this episode, and we'll delve more into the combined topics next week, is just the general idea of, should area directors be running their area match? How involved should the area director be? And I will definitely say that running this match with all the help that I got, I by no means was this a one-man affair. I was just kind of giving direction and marshaling the troops in a lot of ways, but I had a ton of people that helped me out, more than I could name. And this is not to say that, I did everything with the sweat of my own brow. Not that at all. But even being involved to the level that I was with this area match did take a large amount of time, which was time that could have been spent on actual board business, on researching motions, putting proposed bylaws, drafting bylaw proposals, getting them through legal review, doing all this committee business, doing discipline committee investigations. There were a lot of things that have either kind of fallen by the wayside or built up in a backlog or had to be delegated out that I certainly could have been doing. And I wasn't, because to me, running this match was a huge priority. Now I'm catching up on all those things. Those things will get done, but it's definitely something that I think is an interesting cultural norm about area directors being involved with running their area match. And I think it's something that we should probably reevaluate. Again, it was a hugely satisfying labor of love, but objectively, when I look at kind of where would my time be best spent, if there was a club, a match director that I could offload a lot of this or all of this to, and basically say, I give this match my Area 6 seal of approval, but I am not personally involved hands-on with running it, I think overall that would probably be better for the organization. And so, there's this idea of, what is the job of an area director? Should we be picking area directors based on running good matches? Now, obviously in my case, this is the first match where I was actually my name was on the marquee as the match director, but I've been involved with the NC section matches for a few years now. And so I kind of had some exposure, but this was at the same time, this was definitely kind of going straight to the big leagues. And I think if we want a really functional board full of people who have the right set of skills and sort of managerial experience and a background in actually doing a lot of the organizational and operational type thing that the board needs, selecting match directors is probably not high on the list. Not that a good match director doesn't also have those things, but it doesn't necessarily tell you that they do. And then also just there's this time element where that having that expectation that your area director, who in most cases has a full-time job, in many cases, has a family, has other obligations outside of work, expecting them to then also, put in the time to run an area match. I don't know that it's a good social norm. Now, I know there are plenty of area directors that do, to varying degrees, farm out their area match. And I'm definitely looking at options for doing that next year, basically finding folks that I trust and basically handing off more of the match. Because I mean, just frankly, even with Steph stepping down as North Carolina section coordinator and not being involved with running the NC section, even having that off our plate, I don't think we could really do as much as we did this year all over again, with everything, with, having to bring the kids and leave them in the Airbnb, and just, not being able to have both of us go out of town together and work a match like we used to. So I don't have a hard and fast conclusion here, but I definitely think that the idea that area directors, absolutely ironclad, should personally be involved with running the area match, I don't think that's a good idea. And I think certainly if there is a way that more clubs can be involved, and the area director basically is involved in selecting where the match is held, but is not personally expected to be hands-on with every decision and picking the stages and this, that, and the other, I think that's probably a move in the right direction, just in terms of having the people in the job doing the work that only they can do, right? There's nothing confidential, there's nothing legally binding about hosting an area match. So as an area director, if you can go do the confidential stuff that requires access to information that nobody else is supposed to have access to, and the legally binding stuff, and taking votes and sitting on committees and all that, and leave the actual match direction to someone else, I think that's probably the direction that we should head. But just something I'm kind of chewing on. Obviously, we're still only less than a week out from the North Carolina section match, so I'm still kind of decompressing from the whole back-to-back experience of those two, and trying to figure out what's on the docket for next year. But I'm sure I'll have a few more bits and pieces as I think of them. But those are all my thoughts so far of about the Area 6 match. And if you have any questions about anything I've said, or you want me to talk more about something or other, certainly I'm happy to answer those in a follow-up episode. But for now, I think that wraps up this episode of Short Course. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is ben@berryshooting.com. Talk to you next time.